work we've done, speaking to people day to day and so on, the work we've done in the streets of Norwich, speaking with people, confirms to us that this question, where is God when things go wrong, is the one thing that is on people's minds. It's one that comes to the front of people's minds so quickly, so early on into the conversation. And tonight I want to give you a very warm welcome. If you don't normally go to church, if you go occasionally, but it's the question that's bothered you. For you tonight, you probably don't know who John Blanchard is, and he and I are very happy if you leave here tonight still not really knowing who he is. But we do ask you to follow closely what he's saying. And the desire is that you will think about some of the things that he says, and it may cause you to think and want to read further. To that end, there is a free booklet on the furthest table, which some of you have already spotted, so that's great. Do feel free to take that, and if there's someone you think, if they've been here, that'd been great, and you'd like to pass on what was said, and the summary, the essence of what John is covering, then again, take a booklet. It's there for you to take, so please help yourself. There's a number of you here who are from other churches. You've tolerated very patiently my foreign details over the last few months, and you know who you are, and thank you very much for your support. And it's very much appreciated, and I'm very grateful. I've looked a bit silly standing here in front of a completely empty room. And thirdly, finally, our thanks to John Blanchard, who's come to Norwich. He's not really terribly sure whether it's the second or the third time. So clearly, in his many years of public speaking, clearly, we've lost out heavily in this part of the world, but tonight he's back, and John is a broadcaster. He's a well-known writer, and he travels extensively. In fact, he's off to the States at the end of this week, and John has written many books, and some of you who are aware of his writings will be aware that recently he's produced Hitchhiker's Guide to Heaven, and for those of you that are interested, then the first table contains books which are available at a significantly discounted rate. So if you want to take advantage of that, then feel free to do so. Before you go, refreshments, teas, coffees will be served. Please stay. There will be, the format of this evening will be that John will speak for around 3/4 of an hour or so. And then if you've got questions, if you've there's something on your mind, don't heckle. One of my friends said to somebody, yes, you can heckle as much as you like. No, that's the wrong venue. And Matthew was thinking of something else. But keep your question, frame it in your mind, and John will give us the opportunity for questions and hopefully answers. Not everything is able to be answered so clearly as we would always like. And if some things are personal and very private in the nature of the subject, we understand, then John's going nowhere till tomorrow morning. So do feel free to come forward and speak with John, and he will be too happy, and others as well will be happy to speak to you as well. And please make use of the facilities, the teas, coffees, refreshments at the end, and talk. And John, it remains for me to hand over to you and to address this subject of where is God when things go wrong. Thank you very much for coming to Norwich.
Well, thank you very much for that. Is this microphone working or isn't it? Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Good. First of all, I want to say thank you to our chairman tonight, Simon Gay, who is the leader of a church, would you believe, of, the last I heard, fewer than 10 members, and yet had the vision to hire this hall in this wonderful setting, and to have the faith to believe that with the help, and he would be glad to say that, with the encouragement and the help and the support of other churches and other Christians in the area, and some not even in the immediate area, to go ahead and to hire this place, and their faith has been totally rewarded. I think just about every seat is taken. Now, as he's already said, and as you might imagine is the case, I'm asked to speak on this particular subject. I speak on a slew of subjects, but I'm asked to speak around this country and elsewhere. I go to North Carolina on Friday on this particular subject, where is God when things go wrong, more than any other subject I'm asked to speak on. And I must say that a naughty thought did cross my mind. Was there any significance? And I'll anticipate what you're going to think now. At this time of the season, to be asked to speak on where is God when things go wrong at Norwich City Football Club. And if that hurts, I feel your pain, because I support Charlton Athletic, and they're in a similar position one floor down. And even if the worst thing happens to Norwich City, we won't be meeting next season because we'll be in the tier below that. So that's got that off my conscience. I now feel clear to carry on with the subject. And it is just a subject that people ask all the time, because we live in a world where things do go wrong. And sometimes they go wrong on just a cataclysmic scale, and everybody talks about them for years and years to come. For example, you only have to mention the word Titanic, and everybody's mind goes back to 1912, and the largest movable object built by man at that stage. A ship that the owner said is so strong, not even God could sink it. And on its maiden voyage, it hit the iceberg and lost 1,500 people, the largest maritime disaster in history at that point. You mentioned the word tsunami, which I'd never heard until 2004, and suddenly it was all over the media, and that enormous catastrophe that spread across the oceans faster than the speed of a jetliner and ended in the deaths, and I wonder if we've quite forgotten this, of 288,000 people. And when that kind of thing happens, people ask, well, where is God? Where is God when that kind of thing goes wrong? You only have to mention two numbers, 9 and 11, and put them together, and people immediately think of the terrorist attack on those venues in New York and Washington, and it would have been another, but for the extraordinary bravery of some of the passengers on board another flight, which caused it to crash into a field in Pennsylvania, and 38 people were killed then, but 3,000 people's deaths on that day. And people say, well, where is God? Where is God when things go wrong? And talking of airplanes, everybody's mind is filled these days with MH370, the Malaysian airline plane. And who knows where it is? I left home in Surrey this afternoon. The most up-to-date news was, I think it was 10 planes and 4 ships out today, and they came back and said we had discovered nothing of any significance. And really, 2 words sum it all up. Who knows? Except that something has gone wrong, terribly wrong, and where was God when that happened? And then the mudslide in the state of Washington, and in this lovely part of the country where there's scarcely anything higher than an anthill, it's difficult to imagine a little town. We would call it a village, they call it a town, they call it a city. It's got more than 50 people in it in the States. But anyway, they would call it a town. We would call it a little village, nestling at the foot of these cliffs, and suddenly a mudslide comes out and engulfs the entire population. The entire village has just disappeared. And who knows how many people yet they will have to declare as being dead. Well, now, where is God when that kind of thing happens? But we can get much closer than that, and to our own lives. We know of an accident or a disease that has struck, someone we know, someone we love, someone within our own family, someone who has just heard some really quite serious news from a doctor or a consultant. Many of you here within the last weeks or months will have been bereaved or know someone who has. You will have attended a funeral. Someone's life has ended, and you say, where is God when that kind of thing happens? What I find interesting, I won't go beyond that, is that often the question is asked by people who never bring God into the conversation at any other time. For example, the other end of the scale, when things go right, they don't spend that particular day saying, isn't it wonderful what God has enabled us to do? Or this wonderful thing has happened. Shouldn't we thank God for that? Now, I say nothing more than I find that interesting, that those very same people, when things go wrong, often bring God into the conversation and ask it in the form of a question. Now, why should people ask the question? Why bring God into the issue at all? Well, the reason is that those people have, at the very least, a vague idea, and some have much more than a vague idea. Some might even have a conviction that certain things the Bible says about God are actually true. And that's why, and I'll show it to you within the next few minutes, that's why they are asking the question. And they are these two things. First of all, but doesn't the Bible say, or isn't it said, or don't these Christians say, that God is in control of the entire universe, in control of everything that he's created? And the Bible does say that. The Bible specifically says that God works out everything in accordance with the counsel of his will. Everything. And doesn't the Bible also say that God is love? Don't these Christians say that God is a God of love? And they're right. The Bible actually does say that. In fact, the shortest description of God in the entire Bible, someone has said, is the fullest description of him. And it says God is love, which is not the same as saying love is God, but God is love. And now you can see why the question is asked. If God is in total control of the entire universe, nothing can happen. A leaf can't fall from a tree without God being in control of that. And if God is all-loving, then how in the world can these things take place? And this is the way they work it out. If God is all-powerful, he could prevent anything going wrong. He could just stop it. If God was all-loving, he would want to stop it. He would want nothing to go wrong. So if God is all-loving and all-powerful, nothing would go wrong. But things do go wrong. Therefore, now follow their thinking, therefore, God is either not all-powerful, or he is not all-loving, or doesn't actually exist at all. And these Christians are believing a load of porkies. In the dreadful events in Kosovo a number of years ago, the ethnic cleansing in the late 90s, some soldiers took 10 women from their families and said to them, we are going to rape you by the roadside, and we want your families to be there. Now they said to them, we're not going to kill you. We are going to rape you by the roadside, and we want your families to see what we are doing. When the ordeal was over, one of the victims said to the media, listen carefully, it was then that I came to know that God does not exist. And you'll allow me to say, I can understand why she would say that. Well, let's run with that. That God doesn't exist. Where does that leave us? Well, for a start, we wouldn't be holding this meeting tonight, because you can't even ask the question, where is God when things go wrong, if there is no God. That's a ridiculous thing to say. So if God does not exist, where does that leave us? Well, perhaps anticipating something I might say later, one thing it does is it leaves us on our own. So there's no point in blaming God. So if you came into the meeting tonight, and you know how wonderful it is to see so many people here, and I'm sure you're not only of all shapes and sizes, yes, you are all shapes and sizes too, but all kinds of beliefs or non-beliefs. You know, the phrase these days is people of this faith or that faith, faith or of no faith. What a load of nonsense. Nobody is of no faith. Everybody is a believer. Did you know that? You say, well, I don't believe in God. Well, excuse me. You believe there is no God, so you're a believer. Your belief is there's no God. So we're all agreed on that. We won't ask for a show of hands, because if you don't put your hands up, you're daft. Everybody is a believer. Now, if you believe there is no God, you're on your own. And you certainly can't blame God when things go wrong, because God doesn't exist. Arguably the best known atheist in the world today is a man called Richard Dawkins. And I recall there was an accident on the M40. Some children, I think from the northwest it must have been, had been in London for some big event, I think at the Albert Hall. And there was an accident and a number of young people were killed. And they asked Richard Dawkins, what do you make of that? And Richard Dawkins replied, and hear him carefully, this is exactly what we should expect if we live in a universe in which there is at bottom no design, no purpose, well, we know that's what he would hold to, no evil and no good. Nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. DNA neither knows nor cares. DNA just is, and we dance to its music. Now, my friend, if you were here tonight as someone, and you may not have been dragged here, but this wouldn't be your normal place, at least not for this normal purpose, and you really are not sure that God exists at all, well, this is what your great high priest says. We live in a world in which there is no evil and no good. Do you really believe that? I'm sure you don't. Peter Atkins, who used to lecture in physical chemistry at Oxford University, says that humanity, and I quote word for word, is just a bit of slime on a planet, unquote. Now, I don't know if that's what he calls his wife, but that's his problem and not mine. But here's another prominent atheist, says he doesn't believe in God at all, and he says, yeah, humanity is just a bit of slime on a planet. Now, if that is the case, why should we care when children are molested, teenagers get stoned on drugs, old people get mugged, volcanoes erupt, terrorists kill 3,000 people in a day, or Hitler slaughters 6 million Jews? Why should we care if we are just a bit of slime on the planet? You see, in a world without God, I'm just pressing this for a point. Let's assume that the atheists are right and God doesn't actually exist. Now, if that is the case, what one animal does to another animal is morally irrelevant, whether the animals concerned have 2 legs, 4 legs, or none. There's no moral issue involved if there is no God who created us with a moral dimension in our lives. If there is no God, then murder is no worse than a sore throat. Let me just illustrate dramatically from 9/11. As far as atheism is concerned, 9/11 was just a spectacular rearrangement of atoms and molecules. Now, it really was. It was a spectacular rearrangement of atoms and molecules. Noise and color and all the rest of it, dramatic in the extreme. But in the NYPD, in the fire service, in the hospitals, in the operating theaters, in counseling rooms, among the thousands of people who were called in to give their services at that point, among them were some who were atheists, undoubtedly. And you know what they did with their atheism? They chucked it out of the window. And they acted exactly as I would expect people to act who believe that we were created by God, that as human beings we possessed a special dignity that nothing else possesses on the face of this planet, and that therefore we should give our very best efforts to succor them and help them and rescue them and cure them and heal them and counsel them and comfort them. My friends, what I'm trying to tell you is atheism doesn't work. It just doesn't work. Nobody actually acts as if there is no God and they're not answerable to anybody about anything. But if he does, then there are some serious questions to be asked. And in a sense, we've touched on some of them already. If you look up the word evil in the dictionary, it will divide it into natural evil and moral evil. And when we think of natural evil, we've touched on some already, floods and hurricanes and tornadoes and poisonous animals and plants, for that matter, that do us untold harm. Where is God when those things strike? And as far as accidents are concerned, think of Chernobyl in 1996, the explosion in the nuclear plant, which has left 800,000 children subject to the risk of contracting leukemia. Nobody will be able to live in that area for about 600 years. And there are countless other accidents in the air and out at sea and on our roads and in our homes and in our communities. Things go wrong and people are hurt and disfigured or maimed or killed. Now, where is God? This God who is all-powerful and all-loving, where is he when all of those things go wrong? And then there's moral evil, what the poet called man's inhumanity to man. In World War I, there were some 30 million people killed. Where was God when 30 million people were wiped off the face of the earth? And that was the Great War, the war to end all wars, and they're making great play of it today in the media and so forth, 100 years from the Declaration. And the beginning of World War I, that was the war to end all wars, except that it didn't. And we got to World War II, and nobody knows how many million people were killed in World War II. There's accurate statistics have never been gathered together. But as we've already indicated, it included 6 million Jews and others who were put to death in the notorious Holocaust. And those of you who saw the film Schindler's List will have just caught a tiny, horrendous glimpse of what went on then. Hitler called the Jews human bacteria. Where was God? And doesn't the Bible say somewhere that in some special way the Jews are his people? Well, where was this all-powerful, all-loving God when, quote, his people, unquote, were put to death in their millions? Since the end of World War II, it's been estimated that there have been 45 million violent deaths. During the Cultural Revolution in China, the atheist dictator Mao Zedong put his enemies to death at the rate of 2,000 a month. In Cambodia, again, another atheist, Pol Pot, in the 1970s slaughtered over 1.5 million of his fellow Cambodians in the notorious killing fields, about a fifth of the population in 2 years. Where was God when that happened? And what on a much tinier scale, or a one-at-a-time scale, the countless cases of murder and rape and child abuse and crimes of many kinds. Where is God? And to repeat, this all-powerful, utterly in control, all-loving God when those things go wrong. And in a nutshell, what I've given you thus far is what I'm going to call the case against God. If you want the case against God, and if you came in here tonight thinking, I've got a case against God, well, I've given it to you in capital letters. That is the case against God. How should we respond to it? Well, this is a meeting organized by Christians, and Christians base their faith on the Bible, which they have good reason to believe is God's word to us. If there is a God who wanted to communicate to us, you would expect that he'd find a way of doing it that was open to all of us. And here is one, and it is the way that God has given us his word. But before we just delve into that, I want to make this point very clearly. God exists independently of our needs and pleasures. Or to put it another way, God doesn't actually owe us comfort or success or pleasure or popularity or health or life. God doesn't actually owe us those things, in the sense that if we don't have them, I mean, not all of us are millionaires, probably not more than 100 or so here. If we're not fabulously wealthy, if we don't have highly successful families, if we're not in a secure job, if we have health issues and so forth, we can't shake our fist at God and say, you owed me that and you didn't give it to me. To put it very dramatically, if for some reason and I don't want to repeat the business about the likelihood of a fire breaking out, but if for that or some reason none of us escaped this building tonight alive, now please hear me carefully. God would not have shortchanged even the youngest of us. God would not have shortchanged even the youngest, so that somebody would have reason to complain about God. And so, now, they might have a question. Of course they would have a question. I met with a couple of delightful young boys tonight, and there would be those who would say, well, why would God allow those two youngsters to die? Oh, I can understand why the question is asked, but God would not have shortchanged them. And nobody who knew them, someone not in the building tonight, would be able to say, God got that bit wrong, because he owed them. Well, how much did he owe them? 40 years, 50, 60, 70, 80 and more, I speak with some feeling. 90? You shouldn't have laughed, that gives the game away. I mean, how much do you think God owes you? He owes you nothing. The Bible says that God has given us all things richly to enjoy. If you enjoy something purely and nobly and good, if it's good and pure and honest and truthful and all of those things of which the Bible speaks, then you owe that to God. The second thing is this, that the Bible doesn't give us line by line detailed answers to every question that we could ask on the subject. Now, I can just imagine a skeptic saying, well, there they go again. You see, these Christians, they hold up the Bible and say, this is the Word of God, and this is our rule of faith and practice, and so on and so forth. But you ask them the difficult questions, and I mean, this is a difficult question. Where is God when things go wrong? And they back off and say, well, it doesn't actually tell us absolutely everything we would want to know. I mean, we would still have some questions about it. Let me try to answer that skepticism in this way. If God is transcendent, now I love that word, transcendent. I just like saying it. It may be my favorite English word, but actually it's a toss-up between that and creme brulee. But those are two words in French, so I guess transcendent means. Let me tell you what transcendent means. Transcendent means over and above and beyond us. Nothing to do with us, not the biggest of us or the best of us, just other. And if I had to use one word to describe God, or where God stands in the whole scheme of things, it would be the word other. And you know that that's what the word holy in the Bible means. Holy means other than us. Now, if that's the case, if God is other than us, isn't there bound to be some element of mystery in our understanding of who he is and how he works? And God steers us in that direction and says, my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are my ways your ways. There simply is a difference in the way we think and the way God thinks. So we must expect that to be the case. Secondly, leaving us with some questions is not the same as giving us no answers. Now, I'm sure that you can see that. That's just straightforward logic. The fact that we are left with some questions doesn't mean we get no answers. Thirdly, the Bible does not tell us everything we want to know. It does tell us everything we need to know. Do you see the difference? I mean, I've studied this book for over 60 years, written 30 books on it and more, and preached many, many thousands of times all around the world on it. I've still got some questions. There's some questions I'd love to have the answer to. I really would. But it tells us everything we need to know. Everything we need to know about God. Everything we need to know about creation and the world. Everything we need to know about humanity. Everything we need to know about man. Everything we need to know about sin. Everything we need to know about God's love. Everything we need to know about death. Everything we need to know about heaven. Yes, and everything we need to know about hell. And the Bible tells us everything we need to know. And Now we can move into it. The Bible tells us a great deal about sin and suffering, about evil and suffering. In other words, it tells us a great deal about things that go wrong in the world. And it goes right back to the beginning and tells us that this hasn't always been a world where things went wrong. In fact, there was a time when everything went right. Even in God's judgment, everything was right. So in fact, we read that after creation, including our first parents, God looked on everything that he had made, and word for word, God saw that it was very good. Not, well, that's okay, but I'll have another go tomorrow. Or, oh, I think I could do better than that with a bit of practice. And forgive me talking lightly about it. But God saw everything that he had made in the entire cosmos and said, it is very good. And our first parents lived in a perfect relationship with God, a perfect relationship with each other, and a perfect relationship with their habitat, with their environment. We don't know how long that went on. There is no timeline given to us. But there came a point at which they decided, and by the way, this state of perfection existed on the basis of their obedience to God and just doing God's will, which they loved to do. They didn't have a problem with it. It wasn't a hardship for them. And for some reason, they decided, we've had enough of this. We want to do our own thing. We want to go our own way. And the Bible's economy of language is really quite amazing. Sin entered the world. Now remember our subject. Where is God when things go wrong? Well, this is where it began. Sin entered the world. And a whole cataclysm of things happened. Their relationship with God was shattered. Their relationship with each other was shattered. And it was replaced by suspicion and distrust and one blaming the other and all the rest of it. Their relationship with their environment was broken. And they now lived in a situation where for the first time they knew what it was to be guilty and alienated and ashamed and afraid. And for the first time, decay and disease and death entered the world. There were none of those things before sin entered the world. The Bible's statement about it is this: sin entered the world through one man, and death through sin, and in this way death came to all men because all sinned. And you would say, well, that's so long ago, do you really believe that that is still the case? Well, I do, because I can add this to it, that while God created man in his own image, that's the word that's used, by the way, God created man in his own image, which doesn't mean the same size and shape as God, because God has neither size nor shape. One of the things that is included in the meaning of in God's own image meant that he created humankind with the ability to live in an ongoing relationship with his Creator. He was created in God's image. Then man sinned, so now that nature, that human nature, is now corrupted and ungodly. And listen carefully, it was when he was in that position, so I almost had to illustrate it like this. God created man in his image. Man fell into ungodliness and sin. Now, Adam fathered children in his own image. It's exactly the wording that's used. The same words. In his own ungodly image. And so his children were not, as his parents were, godly. They were born that way. And so were their children, and so were their children, and their children. I don't know how many more children I've got to say before you lot arrived. We lot arrived. And you see, I met someone the other day who said, I'm really working hard on tracing back my family tree. That's a fascinating thing. I dare not go too far down that line in my family, but some people enjoy doing that. But if we could really trace our family tree all the way back, we would come to a man who was created in the image of God, created perfect, and in perfect obedience to his Maker, he fell into sin and then began to populate the world with those who shared his fallen, godless nature. And my friends, I would be betraying my calling if I didn't say, and that is the kind of people we are. You say, well, I really don't like the sound of that, and I really don't think that that's what I am. Well, some years ago there was a correspondence in the Times newspaper, and the question asked was, what's wrong with the world? And all kinds of responses flooded in, and I'm sure some of them were quite fascinating. Let me read to you the shortest letter of all, which turned out to be the very best. Don't forget, the question is, what's wrong with the world? Here is the letter in full. Sir, I am G.K. Chesterton. That was all the letter said. You want to know what's wrong with the world? Well, I am. I'm what's wrong with the world. I'm making my contribution to what is wrong with the world. Now, if that still doesn't sit too easily with you, what would you say if, through the miracle of modern technology, on this screen we were about to show you, in 30 minutes, you'd fit some gadgets on your head and that would enable you to do that. In 30 minutes we could show you a person's entire life. I don't mean like this is your life on the program, when they got some famous or otherwise person on and all his friends told lovely lies about him and everybody clapped and thought that was a wonderful show. But imagine that in this show tonight we are going to see the entire life of a person, everything they did, every word they spoke, everything they did when nobody was looking, and everything they thought in their minds. So we'll just take 30 minutes to show this film. You'd be shuffling to me, you'd be around here to make sure you've got a good view. Now, before you move, I've got some news. It's your life we're going to show. Now, you really would move. Straight out that door. Now, why would you do that? Why would every one of us, if we knew our life was going to be screened here, we'd be out of that door quicker than Norwich can see the opening goal? I shouldn't have said that. I did not mean to say that. Why? We like seeing me. Oh, this is me on holiday. Look, that's me with the camel. The camel's on the right. I'm the one on the left. And we just love it. Well, let's see the whole shooting match here. And you say, no thanks. Why? Because you'd be ashamed. Because there are things that you have done, said, or you would not like the person sitting next to you. Now, if you wouldn't like the person sitting next to you to know, because you know that they would be, well, embarrassed to say the least, how do you stand in the sight of a God who is perfect, who cannot even, we're told, look upon sin? And the Bible goes further and says that because of that, we are left to ourselves. I'm going to repeat that several times, I'm sure. So do please be carefully here. Left to ourselves, we are exposed because of our sin. We are exposed to the anger of a holy God. You say, well, God couldn't possibly be angry. God's a God of love. He would never be angry. Well, if you say that, you've either never been a parent or you've forgotten what it's like to love a child and to be angry at what they've done. And the Bible speaks massively about the anger of God. And if it didn't, well, I don't know what kind of God we would have. A God who would say, well, do what you like and I couldn't care less. What parent would say that to a child? I don't care what, just go and do your own thing. You would say, no, I'm jealous for your good, for your righteousness, for truth and honesty and purity in your life. And I'll do everything I can to bring that about. And I will be angry and all the rest of it if that doesn't happen. Well, God is jealous of his own holiness and longs for the good of his people. And so we are exposed to the wrath of God. And it gets worse. Because if we die in that position, we will be exposed to that anger forever. And you say, well, so you bring me here to the Canaries ground to tell me, firstly, that by nature, I am a sinner. That God is angry with me because of my sin. Then I'm exposed to that anger, and if I go on left to myself for the rest of my life, I will spend eternity subjected to his anger. Well, if that's all you had come to hear, and maybe lots of things you think, well, I haven't even touched on that yet, but don't worry, we've got to be out of here by 2 in the morning, and we'll get there. But you say, well, I'm not sure that I can handle that. How could a holy God sweep sin, impurity, dishonesty, uncleanliness, immorality, theft, pride, anger, justice? How could a holy God sweep all that under the carpet and say, oh, come on, all come into heaven? But the Bible's message is not merely that. God has done something about all of that. And there are some people who would say that the most important verse in the Bible, I'm not sure that we can ever say that about any verse. We've all got, those of us who know our Bibles have got favorites. But what God did is summarize, at least in this statement, that some of you will know well. God so loved the world, loved the world, that he gave his only begotten Son, so that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. His Son was Jesus Christ, who came into the world 2,000 years ago. Not merely a man, but God in human form and flesh. And Jesus did something that you and I have not done. He did live a perfect life. He never broke God's law. He never thought or said or did anything that was wrong. And in case you think, well, he was spared a lot of the things that hit on us. No. He was tempted in every way, just as we are, but was without sin. So he showed us the way life should be lived. And not only that, but having met all the demands of God's law by living a perfect life, he then absorbed in his own body and spirit God's punishment for sin by dying on the cross. That's what Easter is all about, coming up very shortly. Jesus died, the righteous, in the place of the unrighteous, but for a purpose. Listen to what it is, to bring us to God. And Jesus said this: light is come into the world, and men prefer darkness to light. You would say, well, I can't imagine that that's true. Why would men prefer darkness to light? Oh, and by the way, we're only about 5 minutes away from your opportunity to interact, to ask questions, to comment, to add, subtract from what I've said. We'll come to all of that in just a few moments' time. You would say, well, I can't see myself. Who would prefer darkness to light? Well, let me ask this now. The game's already been given away. This is probably only my second time in Norwich, maybe my third, but I don't have a memory anymore. I've got a forgettery. So, but I don't think it's probably only my third time. And I'm going to assume now, for our purposes, that we're all from Norwich. Now, the little that I know about Norwich, I'm still going to take a chance to say this. Most people in Norwich today did not begin their day by thanking God for whatever rest they had in the past night, read something from his word, and prayed that God would help them to live today in a way that was pleasing to him. Most people did not do that. Most people in Norwich do not regularly turn to the Bible, knowing it to be the Word of God, and read, what is it that God is telling me? How is God trying to help me here to live the kind of life I should? Most people do not do that. Most people's aim today, above everything else, was not, I must live today in a way that will please God. That's really what I ought to be doing today. Most people in Norwich did not attend a place of public worship on Sunday. Most people didn't do it. And why would that be? You see, there's no law in this country, not even by this government or the one before it. There's no law in this country that says you must not pray, you must not read the Bible, you must not seek to live a godly life. You must not go to church on Sunday. There's no law that says that. So why is it that people behave in that way? It's as clear as crystal. That's what they want to do. That's what they choose to do. So Jesus said, I've come into the world, I've showed you the way, I'm the light of the world, and most people prefer darkness to light. So most people prefer not to pray day by day. Most people prefer not to ask God to bless them. Most people prefer not to read the Bible. Most people prefer not to attend a place of public worship. So hey, nobody's forcing them. That's a choice. So they choose to turn their back on what God has done for them and shown them in the life of Jesus Christ. And that to me is the clearest way of trying to understand, well, where is it that we have gone wrong? Why is there wrong in the world? It is because people are going their own way instead of following the light of the world who came into the world. Christ died, the righteous, in the place of the unrighteous, to bring you to God. And even that is not the end of the story. Because having been dead and buried, and I've been looking at that in connection with the book I'm writing at the moment, having been dead and buried, on the third day, he rose from the dead. That is what Easter is all about. That's the difference between Jesus and every other human being who's ever lived. So the worst of our enemies, death, which puts an end to all of our life and music and enjoyment and friends and money and possessions and influence, those things are gone in a moment. That's our greatest enemy. Jesus endured it and defeated it and rose again from the dead and is alive today. Now, I've heard, made it my business to hear, all kinds of, quote, explanations, unquote, as to there must have been something else that happened. And you know the story well enough without me rehearsing it, I'm sure. Maybe the Romans stole the body. Now, why would they do that? Jesus said he would rise again from the dead, and that's what his followers eventually came to believe, and that's what sparked off the Christian church. So if the Romans stole the body, and the disciples went around preaching Jesus has risen from the dead, do you know what the Romans would have done? They'd have put up a big sign saying, Jesus is too, this way. See for yourself. And that would have, if that had happened, the Christian church wouldn't have lasted a week. Realize that? Well, maybe the disciples stole the body. Why in the world would they do that? It was safely buried in the tomb of a friend, Joseph of Arimathea. And why would they have stolen it? For medical research? Why would they have stolen it? And then they secreted it away somewhere. Oh, really? And then went out preaching, we have seen Jesus, and he's risen from the dead, and he's alive today. And when they were persecuted, reviled, imprisoned, tortured, and killed, nothing would stop them. They said, we have seen him. But you can do what you like to us. And let me tell you just one other. Well, on that first Easter day, the disciples went to the wrong tomb. Well, now, forgive me being very personal. But almost exactly to the day 4 years ago, I laid my wife's body in the grave. And, of course, several times a year, I go. And I never have to ask the director of the cemetery, could you tell me, please, where Joyce Blanchard is buried? And do you think that when I die, and my sons are in charge of the arrangements, they'll have to say, where in the world did we put mine? And forgive me being personal, and I don't mind you laughing at it, because it is so ludicrous. Of course, I know where Joyce is. I overlooked the grave yesterday when the special meeting was being held in the grandstand at Epsom, of all places. And our grave is right at the very top of Epsom Cemetery. You can virtually look down on it from the top of the grandstand. Because I know where it is. And how in the world would... Oh, and by the way, Joseph of Arimathea, it was his grave. If they went to the wrong tomb, don't you think they could say, Joseph, you just tell us exactly where it is? And do you think Joseph would say, well, search me? I mean, they just, look, I don't want you having that approach. What I want to hammer home as clearly as I possibly can, there has never been an argument brought by men in 2,000 years that puts a scar on the truth that Jesus rose from the dead and is alive today, changing the lives of all who put their trust in him, and beginning to give livable answers to some of the questions that people ask on the subject that we are considering tonight. Now, I want in the much shorter second part, so it won't be a second half, the much shorter second part of our evening to go into areas that I'm sure you expected to have gone into, and maybe what we tackled is not the way you expected it to be tackled. But I said that you would have an opportunity to take part and have some input, and we're going to have it right now. So here's what I'd like you to do. First of all, I'm going to sit down here by Simon for about a minute and give you a chance to shuffle around and cough and sneeze, but not to switch on your mobile phones. Nudge the person next to you and say, well, go on, you ask him. And we've got some roving mics. We've got some roving microphones, so you don't have to come up here and all the rest of you can stay exactly where you are. And if you want to agree with what I've said, please do so very, very briefly. If you want to disagree, please disagree in any way you like except throwing things. Disagree, but this is Norfolk, so you do it agreeably. So disagree agreeably if you want to. And if you want to ask a question on our subject, any question you like, I'll be glad to hear it, and I hope I'll be able to help you with an answer I give to it. So I'm going to sit down for about a minute, and then it's going to be open. You can now make all the noise you want. So if you just pop a hand up and we'll get a microphone to you. Big spray here on the face. Lady over here.
Hello. Hi. So you were talking about omnipotence to start off with God's all-powerfulness and almightiness. I'm sure you're familiar with René Descartes. He believes that God has the power to do absolutely everything, the logically possible and the illogically impossible. Like he can do nonsensical things such as make square circles and lift rocks that are too heavy to lift and that sort of thing. If God can do absolutely anything like that, then why does he not make it so that we have the ability to sin, but he remains just by not punishing the sin?
Okay, I'm not a big fan of René Descartes, but thank you for quoting him. You see, a God who did what you've just said at the very end there would not be a God that I would want to worship, because the God I seek to worship is a holy God, and so can't look upon sin and discount sin and say, boys will be boys and sweep that under the carpet and move on. I wouldn't value a parent who treated their children like that. I think I covered that a little earlier. So I don't go along with that, nor would I go along, and I'm not sure that Descartes used exactly those words. They're the things that God can't do. He can't lie, can't deny himself. So those are two that God simply cannot do. And he cannot do nonsensical things like make square circles or circular squares, because God is a God of truth, and there are no circular squares and no square circles. So it's an interesting thing to pass through our minds, but absolutely true. There are things God cannot do, and I'm glad that there are things he can't do. He can't lie, so I can trust his word completely.
Thank you.
Somebody right here. Oh, well, somebody at the back. You close to that person at the back?
Hi there.
Hi.
Just one thing really. Why does God sometimes seemingly take our relatives away from us before their time?
Why does God seemingly take our relatives away before their time? Good question to ask me, because my mother died when I was 5. And most people would say that was before her time. My question would be, what is our time? What the Bible tells us is that our times are in God's hands. So there's that answer to the question. But you see, if we had our time, I've heard people say, I wouldn't like to live. What's the oldest lady in England now? About 103 somebody, or is it 113? I read it a few months ago. So, oh, I wouldn't like to live to be 113. Well, how about 100? Well, I wouldn't like to live to be 100. How about 90? I'm not sure about that. How about 80? Oh, yeah, I'd like to live to be 80. If that's so somewhere between 80 and 90 is the right time, is it? Let me tell you this, if you were 85 and feeling fit and somebody said, that's enough, that's you said, oh, just carry on a bit longer. Woody Allen once said, I'm not afraid of dying, I just don't want to be there when it happens. No. We may have a time, and God has a time, and our times are in His hands. Yes, sir. Gentleman right here in the front, and then one at the back. So there we are. I can hear you, and I'll repeat it. Oh, actually, it's easy. Yeah, I'm sorry. I let myself in for it by saying I have many unanswered questions. And this gentleman, who let him in, says, tell us your most unanswered questions. And it would be this. Why did God allow sin in the first place? I don't know the answer to that question. But as all of God's ways are just, and everything God does is perfect, He had a reason for doing so. Why did God allow our first parents to sin? Search me. And I've read some intriguing stabs at answering the question. The fact of the matter is, we don't know. And the Bible gives a lovely illustration about this. It says, can you imagine a potter saying, a pot saying to the potter, why have you made me this shape? And the answer is, you can't imagine that happening. The pot would say to the potter, hey, I want to be tall and skinny, not big and fat. But I won't pursue that. You can't imagine a pot doing that. And it says it's just as illogical for someone who has a proper understanding of who God is to say, look, I understand why we have questions. I have questions. But we mustn't let the things we don't know upset the truth that God tells us. So we can be sure of certain things, unsure of certain things. We mustn't let the unsure upset the sure. Gentleman at the back, and then you.
Well, we actually share the same question, because that was my thought. Why would an omniscient God, would He create an angel that wasn't just a messenger, was able to wage war in heaven, and then end up on earth with this perfect paradise and allow the creation to go on from there? Surely that's a design fault with an angel. And knowing the suffering that would follow from it. Why start the whole ball off when you actually know the end from the beginning? Why not just create angels that do what they're told as opposed to having a democracy of sorts?
And therefore humans who always do what they're told and so on and so forth. I don't think we really would like that, because then we'd be robots. We wouldn't have any alternative but to do the right thing all the time, and life would be even more boring than some people say it already is. But I mean, we simply don't know. What I would not do is accuse God of a design fault, and I wouldn't recommend meeting God on the great day and saying, I've got an argument with you, there was a design fault in what you did. Yes, sir. Someone right at the very back. All the bad boys are always in the back row.
Okay. Yeah, there's been a few comments about...
Sorry.
Hi, there's been quite a few comments about why isn't the world perfect? And I guess my response to that would be, what would be the point if it was? Because you've got heaven, which is perfect. I'm coming from an agnostic viewpoint, by the way.
Sorry, you're a what?
I'm an agnostic.
Okay.
I'm kind of open to a lot of things.
That's good.
If life was perfect, then there'd be nothing to test yourself up to as to whether you go to heaven or hell at the end of your life. So if life was perfect, we'd in effect already be in heaven. So I guess that's my response to why isn't life perfect?
Yes.
Because we need to prove ourselves in some way.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, and thank you. An agnostic, by the way, is made up to it. The Greek word for knowledge is gnosis. Gnosis, as we would spell it out, and the a bit is the negative, so it becomes a not knowledge or a don't know. So an agnostic, and I love to meet with agnostics, because what they're saying is, I'm not saying there is no God, and I'm not saying there is a God. I'm genuinely saying I don't know, and I'd like to hear more about it. I'd like to hear the thing about it back and forth, and make up, as they would say, make up my own mind on the matter. So thank you for that. But yes, you've helped partly to answer this gentleman's question. Yes.
Thank you. I was wondering, you touched upon the area of man's inhumanity to man and man-made sin. You talked about the Titanic, the 6 million Jews, etc. I can understand completely myself and reconcile that with my belief in God. Do you make a distinction between the natural disasters like the tsunami and the man-made atrocities that occur? And if you do, what is it? And how do you believe God is feeling when things like the tsunami take place?
There's a question about God feeling there, which is another ball of wax altogether. But the difference between the two is quite simply this. But one of the things that happened, and I really didn't mention it specifically, that when man sinned, okay, his nature was ruined, his relationship with his partner was ruined, his relationship with God was ruined, his relationship with the cosmos was ruined, and the cosmos was ruined. It was thrown, the whole cosmos was thrown out of sync. And the Bible's words for it is that it's subject to frustration. It's in, and here are the words I'm looking for, it is in bondage to decay. That's the wording the Bible uses. It says, the cosmos is in bondage to decay. If the Apostle Paul had been a scientist, he would have written, it's subject to the second law of thermodynamics, which is that the available energy in the cosmos is getting less and less, and the thing is fracturing and breaking up. And we are literally seeing that. There were no tsunamis and earthquakes and whatever before what we call the fall, before sin entered the world. And when sin entered the world, the cosmos was fractured as a result. So there is a distinction between accidents that are caused by man's wrongdoing. You know, incidentally, they got a recommended number of lifeboats for the Titanic, and the owner said, no, we'll put fewer lifeboats than that, we'll carry more passengers. Well, who was to blame for that? That dreadful atrocity in South Wales when all those school children were killed when the tip fell down on them. They were strongly advised not to put buildings there because it was always likely that that would fall. And the official reports put the blame on humans for what happened there, although we would call it a natural disaster. But then there are some in which humans are clearly not directly involved, like a tsunami, for example. So there's a distinction between the natural evil, the accidental evil in which man has had a share, and the moral evil in which man is totally to blame. Somebody else? Oh, right at the back.
I'm a Christian and I believe in God fully. I've chosen to do good, I've chosen to go the right way. However, I still find myself occasionally sinning. Is this just a part of me that wants to be bad? Is it God allowing me to sin so he can discipline me through this? Or is it the devil or something else trying to drag me away from God?
Well, it's a straightforward question. Not. Firstly, clearly the devil is involved because he's in the business of tempting. And I am here to tell you that when you've been a Christian for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, it doesn't get easier, it gets more difficult. And if you're in the public eye as a Christian, or if you're in any way being effective as a Christian, you're going to get more bad treatment than perhaps other people. So he's involved in that. God isn't doing, towards the end of the New Testament, someone called James writes, let no man say when he is tempted, I am tempted by God, and I'm quoting literally, for God cannot tempt any man, but a man is tempted when he is drawn away from his own lust and enticed. And when that goes on, it leads to death. So the picture is not God is tempted. God tests us. There's a difference. God tests us. The devil tempts us. God tests us to make us stand stronger. The devil tempts us to make us fall in any way he can. But the great thing for a Christian is that he can open this Bible and say, if we say that we have no sin, well, we deceive ourselves, and the truth is not in us. But if we confess our sin, and the word confess comes from two words meaning name together. To fess up is to speak up about it. Con means together. So if we fess up to God about something, if we confess our sin, he is faithful and just to forgive us our sin and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. And there was an occasion when Jesus used a wonderfully practical illustration about this, the difference between washing your feet and having a bath. One of the disciples was asking about this, and to shorten this up, there are times when you need to wash your hands because your hands have got dirty. I changed the toner in my printer yesterday. I did something wrong, and these fingers were smeared in dark, dark black. I'll tell you what I did not say. Well, I better go and have another shower. No, I'll clean those hands up, and then I'm totally clean because I've showered. And if you become a Christian, you've been made totally clean. You've been made right with God. Now, if you get your hands dirty, you can wash them. You don't have to go and, you don't have to get converted again. Once you're made right with God, you're right with God forever. But as we walk along, as we go through life, we make mistakes, we do sin, and if we do, we can confess it and know God's forgiveness. Yes, sir. Right here in the middle. And then a gentleman at the front.
Thank you, John, for what you said. One of the questions I want to ask you is that the situation which happened this week in this country, why has God let this the way Christian marriage has been redefined, and that we as Christians here in this room, even pastors here, why has God let people like a government in London try and redefine marriage when God created man to be one man and one woman?
Well, it's part of the bigger question, why did God allow sin in the first? Why does God allow sin of any kind? But let me make this thing absolutely crystal clear, and that is that the government has not redefined marriage. Nobody can redefine marriage, even if the Archbishop of Canterbury said so on Sunday morning at 7:20. He was asked about it and said, well, the government has redefined marriage, that's it, it's done and dusted, let's move on. And I say, no. He did. Because I heard it. And I got good hearing. God defined marriage, and nobody can redefine it. And they can call it marriage or anything they like, but it's not marriage. Yes, sir. That's an interesting. That's an interesting point. You see, there are those who would say, how could God allow 6 million Jews to be killed? Let me just take that one example. And then to jump much lower than that, how could God allow 3,000 to be killed on 9/11? How could God allow 300 and something, we must assume, to be lost in MH370? How could God allow 100 to be lost in a mudslide in the state of Washington? How could God allow 10 people to be killed in a road accident? How could God allow one person? And you see what I'm getting? You get to the point where you say, well, God could prevent all, and if God doesn't prevent the very big, where would we draw the line? Would we say, well, it'd be all right to allow one person to be killed, but not 6 million? Well, none of us will accept that either. And so we can't go down that logical route. Let's just have two more for the sake of time. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much for coming out, and I've enjoyed it.
I don't know where else to go.
I just want to ask, something I've often found very difficult to understand is that because God knows the beginning from the end, he knows what's always going to happen. I've often found it very difficult to understand why God would, knowing who is going to, from a Christian perspective, go to hell, why he would allow people to just use their free will or to do what they will do, knowing that in the end they're going to go to hell. Why won't he do something to intervene in any way he can, being all powerful and all loving, to prevent that from happening?
Well, thank you for that. But you see, it's another why question. Why would God do that? And those are among the questions to which I don't have an answer, and the Bible doesn't give us an answer. Why would God do that? What is it? We bring logic to that. We would say, now, logically speaking, I don't see that. Now, I don't mean that God is not logical. What I mean is that God is not bound, he's not constrained by logic, which we are. We use part of our mental faculties and we think things out logically, and God doesn't. But look, his ways are higher than our ways, and his ways are perfect. And if we can't understand it, it doesn't mean that God is wrong, it means we're not smart enough. And if we put what we know against what God is, it's a no-win situation. And I say that carefully because I appreciate that there are those who could think of people very close to them in their own families about whom they're very concerned. But that is the fact of the matter, that God has not told us everything, but he's told us enough to live for him and to get on with what he's given us to do. We'll have one. Maybe we won't have. Yes, there is. Right over there.
Can I just ask you to address the first question that you actually started, which is, where is God when things go wrong? There are people that when they suffer something dreadfully, they actually say, well, where is God in this? They might be believers, they might be unbelievers, but can you just address where is God at that point?
Yep, that's exactly what I'm going to do right now in this latter part, and begin with a very, I think, striking, stunning example of what I mean. But before we do, and I tend to do this now at the end of the Q&A so it doesn't intrude right at the very end, and just to underline what Simon was saying at the beginning, and just so that we can be clear about the situation. As you leave, when you stop for refreshments, at the very last table you will come to, there are umpteen copies of the book of tonight's title. The same logo on as the invitation that encourages you to come. Where is God when things go wrong? Please take those away with you. There's not one for everybody, so if you've come as a family, 2 of you, then be generous and just take one, but they are completely free. Those are on the far table, all right? Now, on the very first table, I was asked if I could bring with me, and I was able to do that by an arrangement with the publisher, the 2 most recent books that I've had published. And the good news about them is, and I'm not going to say anything good about the books, I'm not in that business, but when I explain what they are, you may say, well, that will encourage me to get it anyway. But the best news about them, or at least a good thing about them, is they're half price, and they're brand spanking new, and they normally sell for £10 a time, which, judging by their size, is quite reasonable. But in fact, you can get them tonight for £5. So let me mention this one first. It's called Meet the Real Jesus. And there are so many false Jesuses being preached, people who come up with all sorts of weird ideas, and I mentioned some of them in the early part of the book. I've spent a very great deal of time following this book, beautifully presented by my publishers, with a foreword by John MacArthur. Some of you will know him as one of the leading preachers and teachers in the United States. It's called Meet the Real Jesus. It's the first to be published by Evangelical Press, or EP Books as they're now known, in what they are calling the John Blanchard Classic Series. So some of my major and earlier books are actually going to be reprinted. They're all sort of coming out of print at the same time, so they're going to make a big thing of this classic series. This is the very first. It's called Meet the Real Jesus. And the second, and I think someone mentioned it just casually in the introduction, is of all things called The Hitchhiker's Guide to Heaven. And yes, the title is semi-nicked from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, Douglas Adams. You know, so many people, including Christians, have such a vague idea about heaven. Well, it's up there above the bright blue sky, as it were. Well, that's mistake number one. But anyway, it's up there somewhere. And then they ask questions like, will it last forever? Who exactly goes there? When do they go there? When do their spirits go there? When do their bodies go there? Will it remain the same forever? Is everybody going to be permanently happy in heaven? How could you be happy if you knew of people that you knew and loved or were in your family, and they're not in heaven? How could you be happy in that situation? How could you be happy if you were in heaven now, looking at some of the things that are going on? How could you be happy in that situation? Will children go to heaven? What about those who are still born? What about those who die a day or so old? What about those who are mentally deficient in some way and have never been able to understand the gospel? What about those who've never heard the gospel? Well, I promise you, all of those questions are tackled in this book, The Hitchhiker's Guide to Heaven, foreword written by Alistair Begg, a name with which some of you will be familiar. And that too is available tonight for just half of its published price. And there is a booklet also on this first table called Why Believe the Bible. Everything that I've sought to bring across in a positive way comes, of course, from the Bible. And those are available. And again, that's at half price, which is £1. Not one of the new 12-sided ones. They're not out yet. Just one of the ordinary round ones will do. If you want more than one, then that's what they are. So those are on that first table. And if I mention it, I'll do it in 30 seconds at the very end, just in case you have forgotten. But where is God, to follow up on your question, right here and now when things do go wrong? C.S. Lewis once said this, great statement. God whispers to us in our pleasures, he speaks in our conscience, but he shouts in our pains. It's his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. That's a great statement. God whispers to us in our pleasures. I think what Lewis was saying was, sometimes when we're really enjoying life, you know, the colour, the music, the movement, the friends and all the rest of it, God gets in our thinking, God gets pushed so far away that we're only hearing a whisper. But the Bible says God has given us all things richly to enjoy. So when you enjoy something wholesome and good and pure and true and honest and praiseworthy, you should thank God for it. God has given you that. He speaks in our conscience. I mean, how much thought have you given to your conscience recently? I mean, this thing that kind of dominates your life. It tells you that's wrong and that's right. I mean, how does it get its traction? Where does it get its power to make me feel relaxed or uncomfortable and so forth? Well, somebody has called it God's calling card in man's heart. That's a great phrase. But God is speaking to us in our conscience. And that's why we should listen to it. Walt Disney, always let your conscience be your guide. That's pretty much the truth. But God shouts in our pains so that when things go wrong, and here's a one-line answer to your sentence, when things go wrong, God is saying something. That's the important thing. Not how can I get something, but what is God saying? And surely, first of all, he's telling us that we're not in control. Now, we're all control freaks, give or take. You know, we like to do things our way. You know, there's only one song that's barred from Desert Island Discs, and that's Frank Sinatra's My Way. Nobody's allowed to choose it anymore because everybody was choosing it, because that's what we are. Hey, this is my life, my money, my home, my family, my this, my car, my everything. I'll do it my way. And when things go wrong, God is saying to us, we're not actually in control. We can't even control the weather. And we certainly can't control the things that we do and the way that we think. So we're not in control of other people. We're not in control of our own lives. Secondly, surely he's saying to us that we're very frail and fragile after all. For all the strength that we may feel. I remember I'm a very keen and very competitive amateur golfer. And I recall a good friend of mine, a partner with whom I played in lots of competitions, phoned me up one Sunday morning about 8 o'clock and said, John, come to the club. And I live only a mile away from the club. It's a nice coincidence. It's a competition on, what do you come and play? I said, Norman, I just can't. I'm too busy. He said, oh, come on, won't you? I said, I'll see you next week. He died that night. He was 52. And I preached at his funeral, and I said 3 things about him. I said he was a friendly man, he was a family man, and he was a frail man. Now, of all the things to have said about Norman Smith, to call him frail, we called him Storming Norman from the general in the Middle East there. I mean, he was bustling and hustling and dashing around. He was absolutely full of ease, and he was gone. So I said, he's a very frail man. And we're all frail. The Bible puts it like this. It is of the Lord's mercies that we are not consumed. So that whenever something goes wrong in somebody else's life, I don't mean we should be mouthing the words, but our hearts should be saying, there but for the grace of God go on. And very often, surely, God is reminding us of our failure, of our sin. After all, it's not God's fault when people lie, steal, cheat, wound, and murder, and break their marriage vows. And I've already mentioned this earlier. If we say that we have no sin, we deceive ourselves, and the truth is not in us. I remember, this touches on one of the questions that was asked earlier. I was at a very informal meeting near Edinburgh a couple of years ago, and in the Q&A somebody said, look, if I steal a bar of chocolate from a supermarket, that is a sin, yes. And that would be enough to separate me from God, who can't have sin in his presence, yes. And Hitler killed 6 million Jews, and that's a sin, yes. So that separates him from God, yes. Well, I don't think that's fair. That's very logical, isn't it? I steal 1 bar of chocolate, he kills 6 million Jews, and we end up in the same boat. Yeah. And I said, you know, if that was the only thing you had ever done that was wrong, I'd be inclined to agree with you. But somebody once said to Jesus, or asked him, which is the first and great commandment? And this is what Jesus replied. The first and great commandment is, look at us now, love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul, and all your strength. So I said to this young guy in his 20s, have you done that? No. Jesus said it was the first and great commandment. So if you have broken the first and great commandment, you've committed the first and greatest sin. Do you still think it's fair? And he saw the point clear as daylight. He said, I can see that. So there are times when things go wrong, when God is reminding us of our sin. And surely God is also asking us to examine our relationship with God. Now look, you know exactly where you were when you heard about 9/11. You could take me to the spot on the ground when you first heard of 9/11. I was in Jersey. Now I'm a Guernseyman, and for me to admit that I was in Jersey is an act of great grace on my part, but I was. I was there for a week of preaching and teaching, and I'd nearly finished my 2 weeks there, and my last service was to be on the Sunday. 9/11 was on a Tuesday. And like millions of preachers all around the world, I scrapped my sermon, I'd done all my preparation, and I preached instead about a tower falling and many people being killed. Oh, not the one in New York, but one in Jerusalem, 2,000 years earlier. And Jesus said, those 18 who died when the tower fell on them, do you think they were more guilty than all the others living in Jerusalem? You see, the common thought in those days was, oh, when you get a disaster like that, well, they must have had it coming. I mean, God must have really said, I'm going to zap them. I mean, 18 at a time. They're just the wickedest people around. So Jesus said, do you really think they were the worst? And then he answered their question and said, no. So that's the end of that. No, they weren't the worst. And he added this, unless you repent, you too will all perish. And Jesus is not saying, if I were you, I'd steer away from falling towers in future. He was saying that, look, unless you get right with God, you're going to be in a worse situation at the end of life. The most important thing is to get right with God. That's the most important thing. Whatever your questions and doubts and all the rest of it, and you can raise all kinds of questions. Look, the all-important thing is this: are you right with God or not? The very last words that my wife heard me say were these: surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. And if you were to go to Epsom Cemetery and go to the very top, and in the middle you would find the grave in which she lies and where I will soon join her, and you'll find her name and her date of birth and date of death, and underneath it these words: with Christ, which is far better. Now, my friend, I speak as a dying man to dying men who live. One day, you and I will lie in our graves, nor the issue of cremation, I'm just using it metaphorically. We will lie in our graves, and there will be a headstone, and no doubt it will have our name, date of birth, and date of death, and then, may not use the words, but one of two things could be written on your gravestone. One would be, and how I long that it would be, with Christ, which is far better. And there's only one alternative: without Christ, which is far worse than anything you could ever imagine. Now, where is God when things go wrong? My friend Johnny Farisi, and I close with this, things went wrong from day one. He was born with spinal muscular atrophy, which in layman's language meant he didn't have the use of arms or legs. And he grew up like that into a full-grown man, became a remarkable character, came to faith in Christ, became a Christian, was a radiant person, great sports fan, ran his own website, don't ask me how. Hadn't been able to sit up for years. And I asked him if he would write his testimony in one of my books. It's not one that we have here tonight, and I did. So I want to end with this extract from Johnny Farisi's testimony. One of the psalmists wrote, "Come and listen, all you who fear God. Let me tell you what he has done for me, and I gladly do so. He has turned my mourning into laughter and my desolation into joy. I bear witness that never servant had such a master as I have, never brother such a kinsman, never spouse such a husband. No sinner ever had a better Savior than Jesus, no mourner a better comforter. I want none beside him. In life he is my life, and in death he shall be the death of death. In poverty he is my riches, in sickness my health, in darkness my sun. Jesus is to me all grace and no wrath, all truth and no falsehood, and of truth and grace he is full, infinitely full." And if you ask, where is God when things go wrong? 3 weeks ago, you could have asked Johnny Farisi, and he would have told you. He would have said, he's with me, comforting me, strengthening me, helping me. You can't ask him any longer, because 2 weeks ago, he died. And on his grave, these words could be written: with Christ, which is far better. Well, now, thank you for coming. I really do appreciate that, and I know that Simon's faith was shattered, overcome by this huge crowd of people. So thank you very much for coming and for listening so carefully. And I do hope that what I've said, however inadequately, will be of some help to you. Please remember that the refreshments are available at the back, and one of the staff here has been as patient as any human being could be in waiting for us. So those will be available. And again about the books, now to make it crystal clear, and with this we close. At the first table there are these two brand new titles, and they are available at half of their price. We have someone taking care of them, don't we? So he'll let you. And also a copy of the booklet by the Bible. I forgot to mention that alongside that table, but next to it, there's a whole selection of other booklets, about the same size as Why Believe the Bible. And if you buy a book, you can get one of those free. But again, whoever's running the show will help you. And then finally, on your way out and right at the very end, there are umpteen copies of Where is God? Things Go Wrong. And those are completely. Maybe we close with just a brief prayer, and then we just break up. And if you want to see me or Simon or one of the other leaders here afterwards, by all means. Our gracious God and Father, we thank you for giving us this great opportunity to gather together, to enjoy each other's company, to consider this question, and to hear what your word says to us. Help each one of us to respond as we should, and in a way that will bring glory to your name and bring real help and blessing to our lives. And we ask it in Jesus' name. Amen.